In this section, we're going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring. So to start off, we need to understand a property. So we have the zero product property. Basically, let's say we have 3 times 0 equals 0. So if the product of two quantities, so in this case 3 times 0, equals 0, at least one of those quantities must equal 0. So in this case, you can see that we have 1 0. That's why 3 times 0 equals 0. Now, we're going to use this property when solving for the next example. So let's look at the next example. We've got x minus 3 in parentheses times x plus 7, which is in parentheses, equals 0. And what we want to do is we want to solve each equation. So basically, we're trying to solve for x. So if you look at x minus 3 as its own number and x plus 7 as its own number, one of those has to be 0 in order for them to equal 0 when they're multiplied. So we can set each one individually equal to 0. So x minus 3 equal to 0, and then you want to add 3 to both sides in order to isolate the x. And that would leave us with x equals 3. Now do the same thing with the x plus 7, solve for the x and isolate it basically. So you want to subtract 7 from both sides, and when you subtract 7 from the left, you're left with just x, and then on the right you get negative 7. So x equals 3 or x equals negative 7. These are the solutions, because when those values are plugged into the original equation, you end up with a 0, which is what we want. Now we're going to look at solving quadratic equations by factoring this time. So here we have the equation x squared plus 7x plus 10 equals 0. So what we want to do is we want to factor the trinomial. If you remember from a few sections ago how to factor this, we want to look at the factors of 10 that add up to give us the middle number, which is 7. So let's make a list of factors. We have 10 and 1, because 10 times 1 equals 10, but 10 plus 1 equals 11. So that doesn't work. Now we have 5 and 2. 5 times 2 equals 10, and 5 plus 2 equals 7. So that works. And because it's just an x squared with no coefficient in front, we can write x plus 5 parentheses and then x plus 2 parentheses. You can just split the x because it's x squared. Now set that equal to 0, and you can do exactly what we did in the previous problem, setting each one individually equal to 0, and then solve for the x in both. So in the first one, we want to isolate the x, so you got to subtract 5 on both sides. You got to do the opposite of what's there. So you're left with x equals negative 5, and then you want to do the opposite over here, so you have to subtract 2, and that would leave us with x equals negative 2. So x equals negative 5 or x equals negative 2 are solutions to the equation, because if they were plugged in, they would produce 0. Now we're going to look at another example. We have x squared plus 2x equals 8. This equation might look a little strange because it's not in the usual form that you're used to seeing it in. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and rewrite the equation in standard form before we start. So in order to bring the 8 to the left side, you have to subtract 8 from both sides. When we subtract 8 from the right side, that gives us 0, which is what we want. And on the left side, we're left with x squared plus 2x minus 8. So that'll be our new equation. Now we want to go ahead and factor. So we want to look at the factors of negative 8 that are going to add up to positive 2. So let's say we look at 4 and negative 2. 4 times negative 2 equals negative 8, so those are factors. And then 4 plus negative 2 gives us a positive 2, so that works. And because it's just an x squared equation, we can go ahead and make parentheses and put x's at the front, and then fill it in with the factors that we used. So x plus 4 and x minus 2. And again, you want to set each one individually equal to 0. So let's solve the first one first. X plus 4 equals 0. In order to isolate the x, you got to subtract 4 from both sides, and that leaves us with x equals negative 4. Now let's do the second one. X minus 2, you want to add 2 to both sides. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So you're left with x equals positive 2. And then the solutions for this equation would now be x equals negative 4 or x equals 2.